Hello, friends. If you want to watch super hit movie Den of Thieves 2 Pantera in English, then you must like this video. If you are visiting our channel for the first time, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. ZemTV friends, in today's video, the movie we are going to talk about is called Den of Thieves 2. Pantera, I am also going to give you all the information on which platform or on which satellite channel you will get to watch this movie. This video is produced by ZemTV. We will talk about what this movie is and where you can watch it, all the interesting facts about this movie in today's video. I'm going to tell you apart from this. We will discuss about the facts of this film storyline, star cast actors' performance in the film, and which character has played which role. We will also talk about the story of this film, and I will give you a small review of the story of this film. Also, we'll talk in detail about the technical department, music department, pre-production, filming, post-production, budget, box office collection of this film. That's why I request you friends to watch this video till the end. So start the video. Den of Thieves 2. Pantera is a 2025 American heist film and the sequel to the 2018 film Den of Thieves. Gerard Butler and O'Shea Jackson Jr. reprise their roles from the first film, while Christian Gudegast returns to write and direct. Inspired by the 2003 Antwerp diamond heist, the plot follows an LASD sheriff who follows a suspected thief to Europe in an attempt to team up with him for a robbery. Lionsgate theatrically released the film in the United States on January 10, 2025. The film received mixed reviews from critics and grossed $57 million worldwide. Plot: in Antwerp, Belgium, Donnie Wilson joins the Panther crew, led by Giovanna, to steal a red diamond and files from an airport hangar. They flee disguised as SWAT. Back in Long Beach, California, Deputy Sheriff Nick O'Brien is recently divorced and seemingly put on leave by the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department. He meets with Merriman's girlfriend Holly and asks her about Merriman and Donnie's plans after the Federal Reserve heist. She discloses that the money from the heist is being stored in a bank in Panama and threatens to release footage of Nick's affair with her unless he is able to get her Merriman's cut from the heist. The Panthers plan their next heist, a diamond vault at the World Diamond Center in Nice, France. Donnie, posing as an executive, infiltrates the bank, while Nick confirms Donnie's involvement through the local task force led by Detective Hugo without alerting them. Nick meets Donnie and forces his way into the crew. Giovanna introduces Nick to Chava, the vault manager's wife, and their inside link. Meanwhile, the Calabrian Mafia, angry over the stolen red diamond, retaliation. The Panthers party at a club where Nick flirts with Giovanna, causing Marco, her ex-boyfriend, and Vuk to brawl with Nick. After being kicked out of the club, Nick and Donnie are kidnapped by the Mafia, demanding the diamonds return to their leader, the infamous Octopus. Donnie calls Nick, who recommits to the heist. Giovanna announces that Marco and Vuk have been ousted from the crew following their fight and declare Nick a fellow Panther. Disguised as a security contractor, Nick maps out the vault while accompanying Chava to store some diamonds for Donnie in her deposit box. After leaving the vault, Nick encounters Hugo and his children in a church. The crew executes a meticulous infiltration, avoiding surveillance and cracking safes, with Giovanna and Dragon running surveillance, while Nick, Donnie, and Slavko go in the building. They secure the diamond and cash, but face complications during their escape when a metal pole meant to help everyone cross to the next building over breaks before Nick can traverse it. Nick improvises under pressure as Donnie and Slavko escape to the streets, eventually regrouping just as the bank's employees become aware of the heist. Upon meeting in a parking garage, the three men transfer their loot to Giovanna's van before Nick, Donnie, and Slavko continue on to the Italian border to escape. The crew are ambushed on the way by Marco and Vuk, who have led a rival gang, the Tigers, to kill them and steal the loot. Nick and Slavko get shot in the process. While Nick disposes of Marco and Vuk's henchmen, Donnie crashes their car under fire, and just as Marco and Vuk are about to execute them, the Octopus henchmen save the three Panthers by killing Marco and Vuk. Donnie returns the diamond, and the Mafia spares their lives while providing them an alternate vehicle to continue their journey. The Panthers celebrate in Italy, but the French authorities arrest the crew and their leader, Slobodan. Nick is revealed to have ratted the crew out during his previous encounter with Hugo, but feels guilt at snitching on his newfound friends. Later, Donnie, in prison, is confronted by Nick, who admits his dual nature, but shares that their friendship was real before telling him to sit back left. During Donnie's transport to another facility, the Mafia ambushes the convoy, seemingly kidnapping him while giving him the same instructions Nick did. Donnie enjoys a beer with the Octopus members, as it is revealed they want to recruit Donnie to work for them, impressed by his skills. Donnie asks what the next job is. Meanwhile, Nick receives a text message from Donnie that reads, "And the tiger changes stripes. All the cats out of the cage. See you soon, Fraulein," implying the rest of the Panthers have also been sprung from confinement. Nick smiles as he drives along the coastline. Cast: Gerard Butler as Nicholas Big Nick O'Brien, O'Shea Jackson Jr. as Donnie Wilson, Jean-Jacques, Evan Ahmad as Giovanna Cleopatra, Meadow Williams as Holly, Salvatore Esposito as Slavko, Orly Shuka as Dragan, Christian Solomeno as Florentine, Nazmi Oral as Chava, Dino Kelly as Marco, Fortunato Cerlino as Zamba, Yasin Zatsatur as Hugo, Michael Bisping as Connor, Giuseppe Schillaci as Musa, Rico Verhoeven as Vigo, Velibor Topic as Vuk, Antonio Bustorff as Tammy, Adriano Chiaramita as the Octopus, Sven Temmel as Milan Lovren, Cyril Gain as Pepe. Production: After the release of Den of Thieves in 2018, development of a sequel was in the works with plans for Christian Gudegast to return as director and writer, as well as for Gerard Butler and O'Shea Jackson Jr. to return and reprise their roles. The film was originally slated to begin filming in 2022. Principal photography took place from April to July 2023 in the United Kingdom and the Canary Islands. The production transformed several aspects of the main streets in Santa Cruz de Tenerife for the shoot, such as building up a police station and jewelry store and setting up a local bar to appear French. Kevin Matley composed the film score, replacing Cliff Martinez from the previous film. Lionsgate Records released the soundtrack coinciding with the film's release date. Release. Originally set to be distributed by STX Entertainment, as with the first film, Briarcliff Entertainment purchased the film for distribution in the United States in May 2023, with Sierra Affinity handling international sales of the film, with a wide theatrical release being planned in the United States for late 2024. However, in May 2024, Lionsgate was announced to have distribution rights as part of their acquisition of Financiers Entertainment One, later rebranded to Lionsgate Canada, from Hasbro in December 2023, with the film set to be released in the United States on January 10, 2025. Reception. Box office. As of March 30, 2025, Den of Thieves 2, Pantera grossed $36 million in the United States and Canada and $21.3 million in other territories, for a worldwide total of $57.4 million. The film flopped, grossing only $57 million on a $40 million budget. It needed to at least make $80 to $100 million to turn to profit. In the United States and Canada, Pantera was released alongside Better Man and was projected to gross $11 to $13 million from 3,008 theaters in its opening weekend. The film made $6 million on its first day, including an estimated $1.35 million from Thursday night previews. It slightly overperformed and debuted to $15 million, topping the box office and nearly matching the first film's $15.2 million opening, which Deadline Hollywood attributed to the choice of release date. The film made $6.6 million, a drop of 56.1% in its second weekend and $3 million in its third. Its theatrical run ended after 53 days. Critical response. On the review aggregator website Rotten Tomatoes, 62% of 89 critics' reviews are positive, with an average rating of 5.9/10. The website's consensus reads, Pantera trades the original Den of Thieves' self-seriousness for a more winking lightheartedness that doesn't entirely smooth over its familiarity, but ought to satisfy those hankering for absolute dad cinema. Metacritic, which uses a weighted average, assigned the film a score of 60 out of 100, based on 23 critics indicating mixed or average reviews. Audiences polled by CinemaScore gave the film an average grade of B+ on an A+ to F scale, same as the first film, while those surveyed by PostTrack gave it a 72% overall positive score. In a positive review for Variety, Owen Gleiberman preferred Den of Thieves 2 to its predecessor, calling the sequel smoother and more all of a piece. He also praised Butler's charisma in the lead role, and he opined that the films could turn out to be Butler's most rock-solid franchise. Brian Tallarico of RogerEbert.com awarded the movie 3 out of 4 stars. Tallarico liked the action sequences, describing them as realistically metallic instead of that CGI cartoon nature that we so often see in films like this one. Robert Daniels of the New York Times also praised the set pieces while describing the plot as convoluted. In a negative review for Rolling Stone, David Fear criticized the film. Future. In January 2025, Butler confirmed plans to make a third film, saying, "I will not wait anymore," and taking partial blame for the 7-year gap between films. Gudegast said a potential third film depended on the success of the second installment, and the studio had received a pitch for the potential project. Later that month, Gudegast stated that the script for the third installment had been completed, also announcing that there are plans for at least 2 additional sequels to follow thereafter. Each film would take place in different parts of the world, beginning with Africa in the third movie, followed by the other planned installments in Brazil and Southeast Asia, with each being based on real swans. The third film was officially greenlit by Lionsgate that same month. Gerard Butler will reprise his starring role in addition to once again serving as producer, while O'Shea Jackson Jr. is also in negotiations to co-star. Christian Gudegast will direct the movie, with the project being a joint venture production between Lionsgate Films, G-Base Productions, and Tucker Tooley Entertainment. Aside from numbering among its fans the esteemed German Arthouse stalwart Christian Petzold, 2018's Cops and Robbers potboiler Den of Thieves made a name for itself by doing a far more convincing impression of Michael Mann's cinema than the many that have tried. Its daunting 2-hour 20 length, leavened by the most playful, unpredictable performance of Gerard Butler's career, it earned every one of those minutes on merit of its scrupulously detail-oriented approach to the heist, with a focus on the nitty-gritty of process that made Mann's masterpiece Heat both credible and engrossing. The magic hour moments of pensiveness on a pristine Angelino beach may have laid the homage on a little thick, but first-time feature director Christian Gudegast had the moves to back it up. His muscular filmmaking style serving the pleasures of its genre, the tension of a ticking clock, the insidery sophistication of burglary tech, the intense competency of the monomaniacally driven personalities drawn to the profession. 7 years after the first installment spun an impressive payday from its ignominious January release date, Gudegast has returned to dispel the doldrums of a supposed releasing dead zone once again, and to prove that he's now perfected the other key facet of Mann cosplay. Though renowned as the king of the crime saga, Mann orchestrated Heat like a macho melodrama, a tacit romance between two withdrawn men who must channel their flirtation, connection, and arguments into gunplay. With an adroit touch elevating its imitative streak, the memorably titled Den of Thieves 2, Pantera, leans into the characterization of Butler's uncouth, Pepto-swigging, name-taking sheriff Big Nick as a figure of emotional waywardness. He's a real guy's guy, practically sweating testosterone, and yet his arc in his second outing follows plot beats more traditionally assigned to young women. Following a bad breakup, our protagonist spends a semester abroad in Europe where they broaden their horizons and regain a little zest for life while opening their eyes to the one true love that's been right there all along. He's not exactly eating, praying, and loving, but Big Nick learns to appreciate and pronounce a good croissant. And that's close enough. Reintroduced clenching his finalized divorce papers in his teeth while taking a leak at the courthouse urinal before whipping his wedding ring at the floor, Big Nick isn't in a great place. Maybe things didn't work out with his wife because he was hung up on the one who got away. In this case, that's Donnie Wilson, O'Shea Jackson Jr., equally natural in affable and down-to-business modes, a real live movie star. The elite getaway driver who made off with the loot last time around. Big Nick's plan to track him down in Diamond Hub, nice, might provide some closure, though, as his FBI contact points out, the crooks have been operating far outside of American jurisdiction. As far as Los Angeles is concerned, they're not bothering anyone. And so the one-man crusade to infiltrate their operation and take it down from within comes to look more like the desperate measure of someone in search of purpose and community. As he integrates himself into the so-called Panther Mafia, he starts to loosen up a little, helped along by a night at the club wherein a hash and MDMA high leads to an apology to a former Yugoslavian for Operation Allied Force and a cathartic chant of "Fuck NATO." The tentative coupling between Big Nick and Donnie, their bond strengthened over a mutual disclosure of backstory at one of the late-night shawarma spots dishing up Italy's finest after-hours cuisine, carries a runtime tacking 4 more minutes on to the justified bloat of its predecessor. That's how Gudegast can get away with long-windedness that threatens to turn this into a looser sort of hangout picture, as well as a script structure that's mostly preamble to the main event, the elaborate multi-phase job occupying the film's last hour. The technical diligence and conceptual novelty on display during the boost uphold a high standard of excellence. Its most inspired sequence played like a nerve-shredding game of red light, green light. Believably portraying expertise requires some measure of the same behind the camera, and the attentive, inventive Gudegast can keep pace with his subjects. As a mid-budget, meat-and-potatoes action studio release, there's something pleasingly anomalous and 90s retro about Big Nick and Donnie's last tango in the Côte d'Azur. But the film's chief virtues, elegant and spatially coherent camera choreography, Butler getting his groove on as Big Nick gets his back, the furtive intimacy shared by alpha males, are timeless. Even if Big Nick was not constantly addressing Donnie as Fräulein for no reason in particular, the subtext that these two cherish each other would be apparent, all but explicitly laid out in a monologue from Donnie about the weird symbiosis between criminals and law enforcement. Never mind that the final scenes resemble the ending of Carol as much as the legendary diner reckoning from Heat. The chemistry between Butler and Jackson as two bulky bulldogs staving off loneliness by playing little games with one another announces the true content of the film loud and clear. The ensemble decamps to the Riviera to steal precious jewels, only to discover that the most precious jewel of all is the homoerotically charged frenemies they made along the way. Plot: Big Nick is back on the hunt in Europe and closing in on Donnie, who is embroiled in the treacherous world of diamond thieves and the infamous Panther Mafia, as they plot a massive heist of the world's largest diamond exchange. Review. As we discussed in our live stream last week, I didn't love the first Den of Thieves. I thought it was an entertaining enough Heat wannabe, with Gerard Butler chewing the scenery as Big Nick O'Brien. I found it too long, and it dragged at times with little in the way of action after the cracking opening scene. Butler is back as Nick in this sequel, Pantera, which hits theaters this week. I was hoping this was going to have tighter pacing with more action, but it's actually the opposite. There is about 10 to 15 minutes of action in the entire runtime of this movie, which is 2 hours and 35 minutes long. I asked on the stream last week what was the difference between a crime thriller and an action movie. And someone said a crime thriller has more drama and less action, which is exactly the case with these movies. The first movie at least had the addition of Pablo Schreiber to the cast, who is one of my favorite actors, and the criminals were more interesting characters than the cops. In this sequel, I missed Schreiber's presence, and the new cast members didn't really grab me at all. This is Gerard Butler and O'Shea Jackson Jr.'s movie, with Big Nick seemingly switching sides to help Donnie Wilson pull off a daring heist. Most of the movie involves preparing for the job, and despite not being packed with action, I still enjoyed it, as Nick and Donnie have some witty banter at times, and I kinda wish the movie was just them in a buddy flick. In this first movie, I found Nick to not be especially sympathetic, and yet his bad behavior made the character compelling. In this sequel, he's less interesting and more subdued now that his marriage is over and he's lost his way. Admittedly, it makes his arc more believable, as this is really more of a redemption tale for him after years of womanizing and playing by his own rules. What action we get includes a fight at a club, an opening heist, and then a car chase/shootout for the finale. It is at times rather tense, but like the first movie, could have had a few minutes trimmed for pacing reasons. This wraps up the story nicely, but also leaves it open for a potential third entry, and despite this movie's flaws, I'd still watch a third one, as I enjoy Jackson and Butler on screen together. I always say this, but my favorite aspect of the entire film was the international locations, which give the film a grander scale and a sense of epicness. Overall, Den of Thieves 2 Pantera is overlong, like the first movie, but I also found the new characters less interesting, and it was lacking in the action department. What we get is well executed, and it's still nice to see an R-rated action movie on the big screen, so there are worse ways to spend an evening. As a movie star, Gerard Butler owns January, the way Will Smith once owned Memorial Day, and the Meg films own August. That Butler's B-movie thrillers now hold sway over the frozen box office light oblivion of the early weeks of the year may seem a Pyrrhic victory, but at least he's the king of something. And Butler's brusque, beady-eyed, scowling Hulk charisma has aged well. A quick-fire actor in a caveman's body, he has the ability to lift a piece of pulp so it almost seems like a real movie. For much of its 2-hour and 24-minute running time, Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, the sequel to Butler's Cops vs. Crooks heist thriller from 2018, does a satisfying impersonation of a high-end crime film. If you want to know what makes Butler a commanding genre bruiser, look no further than the way he smokes on camera, dragging on a cigarette as if he were sucking the tobacco right into his soul. In Den of Thieves 2, Butler returns as Big Nick O'Brien, an LA cop at the frayed end of his tether. There's a new team of burglars, they're Balkan thugs who speak in naughty accents, and O'Shea Jackson Jr. is once again on hand as Donnie Wilson, who by the end of Den of Thieves was revealed to be that film's underworld mastermind. Having successfully robbed the Federal Reserve by stealing a mountain of about-to-be shredded bills so no one would know they were missing, Donnie escaped to Antwerp, which is where he now hooks up with Giovanna, Evan Ahmed, who leads a team of thieves known as the Panthers. Pantera is the code name for the police task force out to stop them. The film opens with the Panthers disguised in SWAT gear, lifting a cache of diamonds from a jet that flew in from South Africa. But those diamonds are just going to be the bait. In Nice, Donnie and Giovanna, posing as wealthy jewel connoisseurs, launch a plan to fence the stolen gems at the World Diamond Center, a public fortress, sort of like a Swiss bank for precious stones, that's patrolled like a castle, with a phalanx of security guards and 137 surveillance cameras. Once set up there, they launch their real plan, to break into the World Diamond Center's inner vault. That's an Ocean's-level job, and Donnie, played by Jackson with a newly nimble cosmopolitan savoir-faire, is going to have a partner he didn't expect. It's Nick, who has tracked Donnie down and wants to join the gang, which he does by parading his newly divorced, down-in-the-dumps cop's life as a turncoat sob story. In reality, Nick wants to get his revenge on Donnie by entrapping him. But the plot of Den of Thieves 2 is a have-your-heist-and-eat-it-too con within a con, with Nick and Donnie as both adversaries and buddies. How could we not want to see them succeed? Nick, brandishing an international marshal's badge, it's expired, but who cares, has formed a hidden alliance with a Belgian police chief, Hugo, Yasin Zadeh, which allows him to strut around the Antwerp police station, mangling the pronunciation of croissant, and generally pushing his ugly American rebel boorishness. He does the same thing when infiltrating the thieves, and it's a kick to see Butler take the piss out of these Euro thugs or get blasted on hashish on the dance floor. The writer-director Christian Gudegast staged the first Den of Thieves as a solid imitation Michael Mann film. It was like an overboiled Heat, at least until the movie succumbed to more and more preposterous plotting. Den of Thieves 2 is smoother and more all of a piece, with a story that skips around European cities and pauses for a subplot about Sardinian mobsters who lost a giant pink rock in the jet heist. They drop Nick and Donnie into the ocean as a threat about what will happen if they don't get it back. The heist itself is brash, fun, and impossible to believe, which, for me, kind of tamped down on the fun. The Panthers learn that most of the surveillance cam images aren't visible on the guard's monitor at any given moment. They hack the grid to learn which shots flash into visibility when. But the notion that they could somehow coordinate all this with where they are in the fortress at any given moment, hallways, elevator shaft, vault, is a ruse too far. Watching Den of Thieves 2, you don't so much suspend your disbelief as slip it a sedative for about 25 minutes. Yet Gudegast, for all his casualness toward plausibility, is an energizing filmmaker. He keeps the mano-a-mano standoffs humming, and he's got a sixth sense for how to showcase Butler as a glamorously disheveled schlock version of Dirty Harry meets Popeye Doyle meets Lethal Weapon, Gone Lone Wolf. Butler has been a star for 20 years now, and in that time he has fought an array of political terrorists in the Has Fallen films, and faced off against forces as disparate as ecological disaster, Greenland, Russian kidnappers, hunter-killer, and anti-colonial guerrillas, plain. But the Den of Thieves films could turn out to be Butler's most rock-solid franchise. There's something old that's also new. Heist movies with a death wish. I remember when heist movies had memorable characters and scenarios. Den of Thieves certainly didn't, and its only slightly better follow-up, Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, tries at the very least, though its efforts ultimately fall flat. The film has less action, which isn't a bad thing since it builds up suspense for the actual heist and its aftermath, and more talking. Whereas the first film was more gritty and violent, the sequel is more polished and developed. But it's also the same amount of underwhelming, failing to fully launch despite an intriguing setup. Den of Thieves 2 brings back Gerard Butler and O'Shea Jackson Jr. as Nick and Donnie, respectively, while adding a plethora of new characters that range from being potentially fascinating to downright unnecessary. Swedish actress Evan Ahmad plays Giovanna, Donnie's right hand, and she's easily the best addition to the film. There's an air of mystery around her, and her on-screen presence is commanding, which is why I was so disappointed that her character is squandered by a mediocre script by writer-director Christian Gudegast that she barely feels like a fully fledged character at all. My frustration with the rest of the characters doubles. Giovanna and Slavko, Salvatore Esposito, another character in Donnie's heist group, seem to have an intriguing relationship. They go way back considering how they interact with each other, but there is never a time when Pantera actually pays them any mind. This is where the film's preoccupation with talking would have benefited the building of tension. There's no point in removing so much of the action to insert dialogue if it's not going to develop character dynamics. Why else would we care about whether Donnie and co get caught or not? The sequel does find its sweet spot, though, after Nick decides to join Donnie and his team for the diamond heist, involving a setup that sees Donnie working at the World Diamond Center in France. At this point, Nick has nothing to lose, having lost his job, his kids, and most of his money. And if he can't beat Donnie, why not join him? This leads to some of the best scenes of the film, including one where Nick and Donnie go out for food and get to know each other better after being thrown off a yacht. There's an untapped potential in their camaraderie if only Pantera played into it more often and more aggressively. The lackluster acting overall doesn't help matters. There are decent moments every so often, and for a while it's enough to hold my attention, but for some reason, Gudegast doesn't try very hard to elevate any of the script's more interesting aspects. Den of Thieves 2 is the poorer version of the Fast and Furious movies. Without the charm and chemistry of its characters, the plot would just be too outlandish and frustrating to be fun. And therein lies the main problem with Pantera. It takes itself too seriously and doesn't know how to let loose and enjoy the ride. More engaging characters and charisma go a long way to cover up the holes in the plot. Two of the characters disappear at one point in the film and don't reappear until the film nears its end. I'm sure it was meant to be considered some sort of twist within the story, but there's such a shallow build-up to it that I was surprised when they unnecessarily showed back up again. A couple more action set pieces would have also helped the pacing from growing too stagnant, as like its predecessor, Den of Thieves 2 is far too long at nearly 2.5 hours. It's bloated, and with nothing too exciting going on, the wait for the heist itself starts to drag. Despite some tension, there's no real sense of urgency at any point. The film sets up yet another sequel, but Pantera lacks the passion and consistency needed to dredge up any genuine excitement for yet another film in a struggling franchise. During the climax of Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, in which two sports cars race through the winding hillside outside Nice, France, trading automatic weapons fire at each curve, I got to thinking, when was the last time I watched a car chase that was this entertaining? We'd have to go back to April 2022 when Michael Bay unleashed the delightful chaos of Ambulance, a feature film that is essentially one non-stop car chase. That was almost 3 years ago, a lot of time to not see something as simple as a good car chase in an American movie, one that balances violence, tension, and sheer speed in the way this one does. But a good action movie that's not also a science fiction thriller or a comic book blockbuster is hard to come by these days, and even then increasingly rare, and Den of Thieves 2 Pantera is a good action movie. A sequel to the 2018 cult film from Christian Gudegast, Pantera follows former Los Angeles County Sheriff's Deputy Big Nick, Gerard Butler, who leaves America for the greener pastures of France. Of course, he's not just leaving his crappy job behind. He's also tailing the one that got away, in this case, the criminal mastermind, Donnie O'Shea Jackson Jr., who pulled one over on him at the climax of the last film and fled to Europe in the aftermath. But when he gets to France and finds Donnie, he doesn't bust him. The two team up to rob the World Diamond Center in Nice. Like its predecessor, Pantera trades in well-worn story conventions. So here we get the team up between former adversaries, which gives us the pleasure of watching Big Nick integrate himself into Donnie's crew of Balkan career criminals. Butler's sweaty, pathetic relatability as Big Nick is something to behold in these scenes, where he initially fails miserably to gel with the Europeans, but does get a few of them to warm to him by being an absolute party animal. A scene at an outdoor nightclub where Big Nick does MDMA and then proceeds to bond with the Serbs and go wild on the dance floor is hilarious. It's the kind of dudes rock hangout that these sorts of movies are made for. It helps that Butler has become a surprisingly likable movie star as he ages. Butler has embraced being an over-the-hill action hero, a far cry from the chiseled demigod-like alpha male of 300, and he's all the better for it. Big Nick is a mess, but in Pantera, he's our mess, the big doofus we root for, since he has a sweaty charisma that makes him seem like one of us. If more crime movies had characters as realistically inhabited as Big Nick, we'd be all the better for it. Den of Thieves 2, Pantera depicts its characters in a more favorable light than the original, which isn't a bad thing, as the mere existence of a sequel assumes some audience affection for the characters. Furthermore, the enemies becoming allies trope wouldn't hit the same if there wasn't some affection for both the hero and the villain, as well as a familiarity that makes this new narrative direction seem novel, even if it's anything but. Den of Thieves 2, Pantera also brings the goods in the central heist scene. Gudegast understands the essential value of procedural details in crime movies. We want to know how the sausage is made, so the more detail you can show about how a given crime is pulled off, the better. Is there any wonder we love the voiceovers in Goodfellas that walk us through bottoming out a business? Or the silent diamond heist sequences in Rififi, 1955, or Le Cercle Rouge, 1970. These two films are of particular interest here, as Den of Thieves 2, Pantera operates as an elaborate homage to them for 30 minutes or so. The heist scene of the World Diamond Center is the sort of patient, tense, detailed filmmaking that makes heist movies so fun to watch. We watch the crew break into the building silently and move across floors and through rooms by following the rotating time windows of the cycling security cameras. There are more floors than cameras, so the camera switches to different views on a timed sequence. There's a certain humor in watching the hefty Butler and Jackson move nimbly through the sequence as if these big boys were as light on their feet as mythical cat burglars, but it never distracts from the pure coolness of watching the heist go down. Most movie franchises are beholden to their own pasts, simply recreating what they've done before for empty nostalgia plays. The Den of Thieves movies are recreating great movies of the past, drawing on the classics to provide entertainment for the modern age. Steal from the best. It's what real artists do. Christian Gudegast, Gerard Butler, and O'Shea Jackson Jr. may be genre artists, but they're artists nevertheless. You can tell. Den of Thieves 2 Pantera is art too. Derivative, yes, like its predecessor, but authentically so and honestly entertaining through and through. Welp, maybe the Den of Thieves movies aren't for me. Christian Gudegast's 2018 proof that he's seen Michael Mann's Heat has generated a cult following over the years I don't quite understand. That befuddlement continues with Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, Gudegast's European double dip into the original's well of ideas. Den of Thieves has a significant runtime problem at 140 minutes, and the sequel is just as exhausting at 144 minutes. Gudegast's film feels almost artificially programmed in its adherence to criminal caper tropes, unable to steal our hearts with the bromantic charms of cops and robbers with boundary issues. Gerard Butler returns as Nicholas Big Nick O'Brien, the recently divorced LA County Sheriff's Department boozehound who can't let the Federal Reserve job die. O'Shea Jackson Jr.'s thief Donnie Wilson is still out there, but he's gone international. Nick's persistence leads him to Nice, France, where Donnie becomes embroiled in another robbery scheme connected to the Panther Mafia. Donnie, Giovanna, Ivan Ahmad, Slavko, Salvatore Esposito, and the rest of the crew plot to infiltrate the world's largest diamond exchange, unless Nick can intervene. Who needs jurisdiction when you're Big Nick O'Brien? Gudegast's follow-up isn't as colorful or chaotic. It's selling what's on the tin, but the product is marginally stale. Den of Thieves 2, Pantera presents a bunch of sophisticated heist tropes with a French accent, which becomes exceedingly tedious as the film lurches towards its inevitable milestones. Nick's hot on Donnie's heels in Nice out of nowhere, companions double-cross their allies, mob bosses threaten punishments should their valuables not reappear. You've seen this picture before, which frankly isn't a death blow. The Town, The Italian Job, and even that Rick and Morty episode aimed at heist tropes follow the same rules. What sets them apart? The devilishness of their details. Den of Thieves 2, Pantera depends on Butler and Jackson Jr.'s adversarial dynamic with a shrunken ensemble, which is a shocking hurdle. Nick's bad boy edge has softened, and Donnie's upgrade to chief antagonist diminishes the character's prior strengths. The two castmates lack magnetic attraction, a substantial concern in a buddy rival thriller. Butler and Jackson Jr. are talented performers, yet Nick and Donnie share multiple scenes where their line reads are pedestrian, like they're pushing through conversational motions. The duo feels less enthusiastic in their Den of Thieves roles, extrapolating into an overall complaint that encompasses the entire experience. Although Gudegast clearly understands how to shoot smash-and-grab suspense, cars go vroom as high-speed shootouts take place on unmonitored mountain highways. You'll hold your breath as thieves shimmy over rooftop gaps on nothing but a steel pole. Den of Thieves 2, Pantera boasts cinematography from Terry Stacy that stands up to most subgenre comparisons, even if crisp visuals don't match excitement levels. Porsches, stacks of cash, and fancy suits flash the extravagant side of illegal professions, while the low-technology countermeasures used to deactivate security systems niftily use gelato containers as detection blockers. Everything looks like it should in a film about dangerous risks for massive paydays, but beauty is only skin deep. Or beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The same people who cheered through Den of Thieves will probably be smitten by the cool-headed charms of Den of Thieves 2, Pantera. When Nick and Donnie get sloshed at a nightclub and trauma dump over shawarma, the film's rigidness melts. When plans meet challenges, the comfortable ease of objective completion becomes excitingly unknown. The hype is real for the 50% of Den of Thieves 2, Pantera, where Gudegast colors money green outside the lines. But for the other 50%, as we're dragged across the finish line, unfazed by blasé burglary antics and swanky duds, it's like Gudegast draws inspiration from 101 booklets about action hero zingers, heist drama angles, and crime team dynamics. It's a shame. Den of Thieves 2, Pantera struts the strut, but ruins the illusion when it talks. Butler and Jackson Jr. can't shoulder the story's weight, nor does character development allow supporting players to assist. Like I said about Den of Thieves, if this sequel were a tight 100 minutes, maybe my review would have a different tone. As is, and considering the issues highlighted above, Den of Thieves 2, Pantera is a painfully overlong continuation that will probably need to find the same second life Den of Thieves did on Netflix. Perhaps streaming it as a background distraction will yield better results with less attentive audiences. The crew are ambushed on the way by Marco and Vuk, who have led a rival gang, the Tigers, to kill them and steal the loot. Nick and Slavo get shot in the process. About to execute them, the octopus henchmen save the three Panthers by killing Marco and Vuk. Donnie returns the diamond, and the Mafia spares their lives while providing them an alternate vehicle to continue their journey. The Panthers celebrate in Italy, but the French authorities arrest the crew, and their leader Slowdown Nick is revealed to have ratted the crew out during his previous encounter with Hugo, but feels guilt at snitching on his newfound friends. Later, Donnie in prison is confronted by Nick, who admits his dual nature but shares that their friendship was real before telling him to sit back left. During Donnie's transport to another facility, the Mafia ambushes the convoy, seemingly kidnapping him while giving him the same instructions. Nick did Donnie enjoys a beer with the octopus members, as it is revealed they want to recruit Donnie to work for them. Impressed by his skills, Donnie asks what the next job is. Meanwhile, Nick receives a text message from Donnie that reads, "And the tiger changes stripes. All the cat's out of the cage. See you soon." Fine, implying the rest of the Panthers have also been sprung from confinement. Nick smiles as he drives, Along the coastline cast Gerard Butler as Nicholas, Big Nick O'Brien, Asha, Jackson Jr. as Donnie Wilson, Jean-Zach Evan Ahmed as Giovanna Cleopatra Meadow, Williams as Holly Salvatore Esposto as Slavo, Ali Shuka as Drogon Christian, Solomino as Florentine Nasmoral as Shavadino, Kelly as Marco Fortunato, Cellino as Zamba Yanzaitzada as Hugo, Michael Bisping as Connor, Jeppy Shalasi as Musa, Rico Fohn as Vigo Velabic as Vuk Antonio Bustov as Tammy Adriano, Karamita as the Octopus, Swen Temmel as Milan, Lauren Cyril Ga as Pape Production. After the release of Den of Thieves in 2018, development of a sequel was in the works, with plans for Christian Gudegas to return as director and writer, as well as for Gerard Butler and Asha Jackson Jr. to return and reprise their roles. The film was originally slated to begin filming in 2022. Principal photography took place from April to July 2023 in the United Kingdom and the Canary Islands. The production transformed several aspects of the main streets in Santa Cruz Denner for the shoot, such as building up a police station and jewelry store and setting up a local bar to be appear French. Kevin Matley composed the film score, replacing Cliff Martinez from the previous film, Lionsgate Records. Released the soundtrack coinciding with the film's release date. Release originally set to be distributed by STX Entertainment. As with the first film, Briarcliff Entertainment purchased the film for distribution in the United States in May 2023, with Sierra Gaffinity handling international sales of the film, with a wide theatrical release being planned in the United States for late 2024. However, in May 2024, Lionsgate was announced to have distribution rights as part of their acquisition of Finances Entertainment One, later rebranded to Lionsgate Canada from Hasbro. In December 2023, with the film set to be released in the United States on January 10, 2025, Den of Thieves 2, Pantera Movie Review. Den of Thieves 2, Panta doesn't strive to go much higher than the bar set by the cat and mouse game of its predecessor, nor does it land too far beneath the original Den of Thieves. It's the very definition of a lateral move, which will likely satisfy the fan base that has built up around the first face-off between criminal mastermind Donnie Wilson, Asha Jackson Jr., and determined cop Big Nick O'Brien. Gerard Butler that said it does suffer from the same inflated runtime problems while taking too long to get to the showcase heist sequence that we really want to see, recognizing what worked previously. Returning writer, director, Christian Goddess leans into Butler's endearingly Hamon persona, with the increasingly shaggy Scottish actor again breaking out. His mushmouth American accent in service of F-Bombblade and tough guy talk. New in Pantera as a fun 48-hour style buddy. Dynamic between Butler and Jackson. When O'Brien learns that Wilson and a new criminal crew have taken up residence in France for another potential score, he heads overseas to bring them down, with the Pant error of the title, referring to the French task force assigned to assist him. This is where the various intricacies of who's who in the hierarchy of GC organized crime threaten to topple over in a sea of rushed foreign dialogue with no subtitles and impenetrable accents. Like Den of Thieves, Panta is very much a reflection of its influences with DNA from Fast and Furious, Donnie Brasco, and The Town in Evidence. Unlike the first chapter, which restricted its action to LA and garnered an air of grounded authenticity, as a result, the sequel is more of a globe-trotting affair, which adds a sense of scope, but robs this burgeoning franchise of some of its identity. Though props to Godast for making O'Brien the butt of several ugly American jokes, as opposed to using his man's man persona as a vehicle to constantly dunk on his French colleagues. It really isn't until about 90 minutes in, when the central heist begins, that things start to hum along in earnest. From that point, Panta relies on the tried Andrew pleasures of a ticking clock scenario, with characters having to move quickly to avoid detection by motion sensors, cameras, etc. It's worked wonders for Mission Impossible series and Ocean's 11. And while Pantera isn't entirely in their league, it's still manages to entertain with several last-second escapes as our characters dart the labyrinthine vault. One complaint about Pantera also applied to the original Den of Thieves. Both movies clock in at roughly 140-ish minutes. Goddess may have aspirations for a crime saga in the vein of the similarly lengthy Heat, but these are ultimately pulpy confections at heart, and there isn't enough story to justify the extreized frame. Regardless, while the previous film came to a bittersweet conclusion that didn't immediately call out for a continuation, Panta is very clearly telegraphing another den down the line. Here's hoping they trim some of the setup in the next one and go. Straight for the caper writer, a director Christian Gudagassi's Den of Thieves is not a film that particularly appealed to my personal sensibilities, but it did allow me to go into the sequel with an open mind and reasonable hopes. My dislike of pretty much every character in the 2018 release held me back from engaging with the story, but I can subsist on standard heist movie emanations, and I'll admit to being surprised by how breezy I found the 140-minute runtime. I went into Den of Thieves 2 Pantera with the most basic of expectations, more of the same, and yet it still managed to leave me disappointed. There is consistency in that I still don't like any of the characters. That goes for both the established ones and the new faces, but it shortchanges in the story department. As much as it tries to dress things up with a new setting and a new treasure, the film's story machinations are far less compelling and exciting, sapping it of the original's fun and rendering it a snooze. Gerard Butler returns as Nick. O'Brien, who remains dedicated to finding Donnie Wilson Aisha Jackson Jr. after letting him slip through his fingers in the aftermath of the Federal Reserve ordeal in the first movie. When he hears reports of an armed robbery at an airplane hangar in Antwerp, he becomes convinced that Donnie was involved, and he rides the hunch to Nice, France, where his suspicions are confirmed. Breaking into the criminal's apartment, Nick makes threats and waves around a defunct U.S. Marshal's badge, but instead of making extradition plans, the protagonist instead says his law enforcement days are done and insists on being a part of Donnie's crew, the Panthers, for his next job, the heist of a diamond vault. Nick is integrated into the work in progress alongside his nemesis stoned friends, vaguely drawn criminal colleagues, and they slowly work out a way to circumvent the various security devices hindering their path to a great treasure. This isn't the only problem, however, as the former cop alienates two members of the yacht crew, turning them into enemies. And it turns out that Donnie stole a high-carat diamond from the mafia in the hangar job and has to get it back. The entire existence of Den of Thieves 2 Pantera is predicated on the idea that audiences want to see the continued Tatar tape between the drunko-edgy detective and the smarter-than-he-looks thief, but if you didn't really click with the characters in the first movie, you're not going to find yourself reassessing while watching the sequel, and B, not going to make any satisfying discoveries within the supporting ensemble. No depth is added to the characters, nor is there any suggestion of growth or development. And while heist movies characteristically provide opportunities for interesting personalities that come paired with special skills, it's a genre staple that's whiffed at. The film does provide a new dynamic for Nick and Donnie, who become friends amid their criminal collaboration, a move taken right out of the Fast and Furious playbook. But the characters working toward a shared goal is the only original thing that is brought to the table. While the former is now working outside the confines of the law, it's hardly a stretch from the light in which he was presented in the first movie, an alcoholic womanizer who alienates his family and bucks up against any form of authority. As for the latter, the most interesting thing about him was the Kizasso's light twist included in the final minutes of the previous story, highlighting him as a secret mastermind, and the follow-up fails to find any way to further define him beyond smart crook. Beyond Den of Thieves 2's main characters, the fact that it doesn't feature any attempted scene stealers in its ensemble isn't something that's particularly surprising, given that it's also a lacking quality in its predecessor, but I nonetheless can't say that I'm not disappointed. I'm a general sucker for the small clashes that unfurl between smart Alec tech geeks, exacting safecrackers, low IQ bruisers, etc., but this is a series that has now twice failed to scratch that particular genre itch. Neither strong personalities nor notable skills make themselves apparent within the roster of the Panthers, and it further adds to the movie's dullness. A similar level of laziness can be perceived in its utilization of setting. It doesn't seem to be unreasonable to expect a flavor change when action is moved from downtown Los Angeles to southern France. But the closest that Den of Thieves 2 Pantera gets to this idea is a running joke about how Nick pronounces the word croissant. There isn't any kind of geographic specificity in the production design, cinematography, or set pieces. It ultimately feels like a simple play to artificially add scope to the world, and like much of the film, it's extremely shallow upon reflection, getting one's hopes up for any movie. Released in January is typically a fool's errand, as the month is famously a theatrical dumping ground for studios. But even with properly adjusted expectations, Den of Thieves 2 Pantera is still a letdown. I wanted some dumb fun. But all I got instead was the dumb, and it sets a very low bar for a second sequel that the end of the film very clearly sets up. Den of Thieves 2 Pantera is neither better nor worse than the sleeper hit crime caper that preceded it. Like the original, it's too long and threatens to become overwhelmed by its own web of underworld intricacies. Nonetheless, with appealing chemistry between stars Gerard Butler and Asha Jackson Jr. and a suitably tense third act heist sequence, it rewards the goodwill the original has built up since its 2018 release. Other information about this film: if 2018's underrated Den of Thieves was almost too obviously inspired by Michael Mann's Heat, the long-awaited sequel sees writer and director Christian Gudegas pivoting to another Robert Darold action classic, John Frankenheimer's car chase classic Ronin. When a character had the code name Ronin early in the film, I allowed the consideration that it might be a coincidence, but then Den of Thieves 2 Panta makes its debt to European set. Stories of international criminals apparent for the next 2 hours, plus including sharing a setting with the Frankenheimer classic in the gorgeous city of Nice, France. Both filmmakers also thrive off attention to detail. Gudas is chewing the option to fast and furious this franchise and go bigger and louder with the sequel. Instead, he has delivered what could be called a heist procedural, a film granular with details about one massive criminal undertaking, elevated by a pair of charismatic leading men in one of the most beautiful places in the world. Nicobrian Gerard Butler, in the part he was born to play, is still licking his wounds over the robbery of the Federal Reserve from the first film. Even though his superiors have insisted that he close the case, after all, nothing was stolen. If you've forgotten a 7-year-old film, the original was about a group of bank robbers stealing the unfit money that's been taken out of the system by the Fed before it's destroyed. Nick knows that Donnie Wilson, Asha Jackson Jr., was the real mastermind of that job, and it eats at Nick that he got away with it. When bank accounts connect Donnie to a recent diamond heist, out of Antwerp, Nick heads to Europe to find his man. However, Den of Thieves 2 is not the typical cat and mouse promised by its setup. It turns out that Nick doesn't want to catch Donnie as much as join his side of the cops and criminals ledger. So when he basically stumbles into Donnie's latest job, masterminding the heist of the World Diamond Authority, he becomes a key player on his team. Almost too key a player. I never quite bought how easily Nick slipped into this world, or how easily Donnie let him. And while Donnie is shown planning a lot of the elaborate crime, it does feel like Jackson takes a back seat to Butler more than he needed to once the job actually gets its feet on the ground. By the way, it's important to note how long it is before that happens. Den of Thieves 2. Pantera is more about planning a job than it is the job itself. It is downright obsessive in its detail about camera cycles, false identities, and elaborate planning. and Gudigas loves to place potential traps around Donnie and Nick, including former members of this crew who might now want revenge, and even the Italian mafia who want Donnie's head for the Antwerp diamond heist. While there is a nice simmering tension, the trailers that show just about every action moment in the film are downright misleading. And Guter once again reminds us that he is practically reckless when it comes to running time, making a relatively subdued genre film by American blockbuster standards that runs over 140 minutes, and yet I rarely felt the length once Nick and Donnie really bond in a great scene of drunken shawarma eating the movie hums to its excellent final set piece, a phenomenal chase, our shootout sequence in the French hillside that once again makes the classic action influence clear in that the bullets have a punch and the vehicular mayhem feels realistically metallic instead of that CGI cartoon nature that we so often see in films like this one. I'll admit that I did kind of miss the Los Angeles hum of the first film and the stronger supporting cast of that endeavor, but I also like Heat more than Ronin, so it makes a bit of sense. I suppose no one is bad here. In fact, Evan Ahmed as a possible love interest for Nick is quite good, but Gudigast relies heavily on the stellar buddy movie chemistry of his two stars, who step back into these roles like no time has passed since they played them. It probably won't take another 7 years to make a third Den of Thieves film that I'd like to be. Subtitled Mega Death Please, and I'm here for it. Almost wondering what action classic that film will pull from in its construction. Someone send Gudigas a copy of To Live and Die in L.A. for me, Dot. I have seen Den of Thieves at least 15 times, and it is easily one of my favorite all-around heist thrillers. I was in the theater on opening day back in January 2018, and I bought the Blu-ray as soon as it hit the shelves. For me, this is just one of those extremely rewatchable films that I love sharing with others. For some reason, Gerard Butler always seems to find himself in some of my favorite action thriller films, with this and Law Abiding Citizen at the top of my list. Making a sequel has been talked about for years now, and eventually I got to the point where I later. So was it worth the wait? Keep reading to find out. I was absolutely ecstatic for Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, and I am happy to report that I left the theater with a smile on my face and the exciting notion that a trilogy is a very real possibility. Now, I want to preface by saying that this film is a departure from the original in terms of overall feel and tone. Den of Thieves is more of a gritty heist thriller that relies more on gunfire and intense violence. Den of Thieves 2 Panta is a bit more methodical with a slow burn feel even, though it still fits the heist thriller mold. It's hard for me to outright say which movie I enjoyed more, just because they are very different, but I can say that I love them both, and each film shines with their unique qualities. This film focuses more on the build-up to the big job, so it requires a bit more patience, but I promise you the payoff is well worth it. Den of Thieves 2, Panta is on another level with the cinematography thanks to the beautiful European setting. And I was blown away more often than not. The film features some great shots throughout, but it really shines during the intense car chase in the final act. At times I was so mesmerized by the sheer beauty of it all that it was almost a distraction from the action unfolding on screen. A good problem to have, I promise. Back in the heyday of 90s action movies, the quality of a film was often defined by whether or not it had a great car chase, and let me just say that Den of Thieves 2 Panta checks that box. Den of Thieves 2 Panta continues the great character progression as we get to experience the relationship between Donnie and Big Nick really evolve in a way I personally wasn't expecting. Big Nick is the ultimate badass with the toughest of exteriors, but the original film showed that he does have an emotional side to him. Den of Thieves 2 Panta builds on that, and you really get to see another side of him, which I thought was great. The original film concluded with viewers questioning everything they thought they knew about Donnie. So in this film, we get to see him in a completely different light. Donnie is incredibly intelligent, confident, resourceful, and in many ways a true chameleon in his chosen field. If Donnie is in the vicinity, you can bank on the fact that something worth stealing is nearby. The film features more of a buddy comedy vibe between the two leading men, which is a different overall tone compared to the original. And I really enjoyed this new direction. Gerard Butler and Asha Jackson Jr. have undeniable chemistry, which is a big reason why this film works so well and will likely be the reason why they greenlight a third film. Plus, Christian Guter has yet again proven his ability to create a certain level of complexity and likability to his characters, which keeps audiences guessing and, more importantly, wanting more. I personally gorgeous here. Den of Thieves 2 Panta opens with an exciting heist that the rest of the film is connected to, similar to the original. But as I said, it is more of a slow burn in comparison. But rest assured, even though the overall feel is a bit different, this is still a fantastic heist thriller that kept me on the edge of my seat right up until the final seconds. Also, the soundtrack was fantastic as expected, and I personally loved the song that came on in the final seconds of the film, which just added to my excitement and need for another Den of Thieves film. More details set in Los Angeles. The first Den of Thieves follows Big Nick O'Brien, an officer for the LA Sheriff's Department, who is as much a criminal as the people he chases down, as he tries to stop a gang of ex-military criminals led by Ray Marmon, director and co-writer, who also writes and directs. Panta takes the audience on both sides as Merriman's crew attempts to rob the Federal Reserve in Los Angeles. I like the first movie, a tried-and-true popcorn flick with enough tension and buy-in from the lead actors to drive you through its 140-minute runtime, but Den of Thieves is not breaking any barriers. It's silly, and you probably know where it's going the moment it begins. It is what it is, and that's good enough. Sometimes a delicious chocolate ice cream hits the spot, even though you've had hundreds of other chocolate ice creams that are just as good. Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, though, took directions that the first just doesn't care to set an unknown time after the original film's events. Pantera is really a high-intensity heist movie, not an uber-macho action flick, even though there's a hefty amount of masculinity here. The film opens in Europe, where a group of criminals outfitted in some intense-looking SWAT gear rob a grounded plane of a diamond, undoubtedly worth boatloads of money. The group is led by Donnie Wilson, a returning player from the original. Federal Reserve heist team O'Brien has been looking for Donnie ever since, yet nobody believes his theories. Back in Laws, Angeles Big Nick is going through it. Aside from his unfruitful quest to find Donnie, his wife has left him. He only gets to see his 2 children twice a year. He lost his job and his crew and is living out of his car. After hearing about the plane diamond heist, O'Brien goes international. He heads to Nice, France, where he believes Donnie, now a part of the Pantera gang, is planning to rob the World Diamond Center. Upon arriving in Nice and finding Donnie, O'Brien decides the badge isn't worth the hell he has experienced over the years. He wants in on the heist. Thus begins the real heart of the film, as Big Nick and Donnie team up to case and ultimately rob the WDC's hyper-secure vault. It has all the typical aspects of a heist movie, figuring out the security, planting things on the inside, and making internal connections to heaven. It's all very to the point, but it's effective nonetheless. Yet what separates Pantera is that it's oddly tender between Nick and Donnie Butler, and Jackson Jr. are the best parts of the movie, bringing a true sense of care, friendship, and admiration to each other. They talk about their pasts, which they realize aren't all that different. They drive drunk on some electric scooters through the streets of Nice, and they seem to form a true friendship as allies. But throughout this burgeoning bromance, there's a whole will. He wants energy to Big Nick Is his changing sides true, or is he just playing Donnie so he can finally bust him for good? Butler's performance makes this dynamic sing. While he's largely just a meat-fed bad cop in the first, Panta gives him a level of interiority. Everything about how Big Nick looks, acts, and talks uses an uber-masculine, and I do everything my way sort of mentality. Yet there are moments where, largely found in Butler's face alone, real pain and conflict are present. When he's partying with the gang, there's a joy and sense of camaraderie that viewers haven't seen throughout the series. We're often reminded of Nick's familial conflict, too, as he appears truly distraught by his realization that his past actions of selfishness have completely ruptured his relationship with his daughters. All of it works well alongside Jackson Jr. as bravado as a sort of suave career criminal, adding a silly yet effective buddy comedy aspect to the film. They have real chemistry, an unexpected yet fully welcome addition that only adds to the weight of the rest of the film's action and tension. As a heist film, it's not shocking that Pantera is largely driven by the tension of the job. How will they do it? Will they succeed? What's going to go wrong? Gudge threads this tension throughout the film, making the entire planning stage of the film, largely the entire second act, interesting and thrilling. Yet Gudegast finds moments to breathe that make the rest of the film work. For a film labeled and marketed so deeply as a crazy action movie, Panta is far more talky than you may expect. Outside of its bookends, this is largely a film whose dialogue and characters take center stage. Fast and Furious, this is not, whereas everything in Den of Thieves feels plot-driven. Gudegasti allows the sequel to take time to forget the plot's noise and instead think about the interiors of our characters. Now that interiority largely starts and ends with Big Nick and Donnie, but it's a worthwhile and lovely addition. Nevertheless, the set pieces too are well orchestrated by Gudegast. The final heist especially is wonderful, thoroughly tense, yet always clear. It's a satisfying and thrilling final act. Gudegast doesn't blast the audience with booming music and gunshots galore. It's all largely quiet, only letting loose once necessary. When he does let loose during a car chase in the mountains of France, it's a wild and thoroughly entertaining sight to see. And largely that's what Panta aims to be, thoroughly entertaining. There's no doubt this is far from perfect. It's undeniably silly and messy with its characters and plot. Contrivances outside of Donnie and Nick and Allison Bachel would be horrified at how deeply this fails her test. That's also not to mention how it concerns itself far too much with creating an intricate web of underground mafia and gang connections that I simply couldn't care less about. But it knows its lane adds some spice and lets the rest of the film and its stars do the rest. It's silly, chaotic, and fun. I mean, what else could you want from a movie titled Den of Thieves 2 Pantera? I remember when movies had memorable characters and scenarios. Den of Thieves certainly didn't, and its only slightly better follow-up, Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, tries at the very least, though its efforts ultimately fall flat. The film has less action, which isn't a bad thing, since it builds up suspense for the actual heist and its aftermath, and more talking. Whereas the first film was more gritty and violent, the sequel is more polished and developed, but it's also the same amount of underwhelming, failing to fully launch. Despite an intriguing setup, Sheriff Big Nick O'Brien tracks Donnie Wilson to Europe after his daring escape. As Donnie becomes deeply involved with diamond thieves and the Panther Mafia, the stakes rise with a plan to rob the world's largest diamond exchange. The film promises intense action and suspense across international borders. Den of Thieves 2 brings back Gerard Butler and Asha Jackson Jr. as Nick and Donnie, respectively, while adding a plethora of new characters that range from being potentially fascinating to downright unnecessary Swedish actress. Evan Arhead plays Giovanna Donnie's right hand, and she's easily the best addition to the film. There's an air of mystery around her, and her on-screen presence is commanding, which is why I was so disappointed that her character is squandered by a mediocre script by writer-director Christian Gudigaste that she barely feels like a fully fledged character at all. My frustration with the rest of the characters doubles. Giovanna and Slavo Salvatore Esposito, another character in Donnie's heist group, seem to have an intriguing relationship. They go way back considering how they interact with each other. But there is never a time when Panta actually pays them any mind. This is where the film's preoccupation with talking would have benefited the building of tension. There's no point in removing so much of the action to insert dialogue if it's not going to develop character dynamics. Why else would we care about whether Donnie and company get caught or not? The sequel does find its sweet spot, though. After Nick decides to join Donnie and his team for the diamond heist involving a setup that sees Donnie working at the World Diamond Center in France. At this point, Nick has nothing to lose, having lost his job, his kids, and most of his money, and if he can't beat Donnie, why not join him? This leads to some of the best scenes of the film, including one where Nick and Donnie go out for food and get to know each other better after being thrown off a yacht. There's an untapped potential in their camaraderie if only Pantera played into it more often and more aggressively. The lackluster acting overall doesn't help matters. There are decent moments every so often, and for a while it's enough to hold my attention. But for some reason, Gouda just doesn't try very hard to elevate any of the scripts more. Interesting aspects. Den of Thieves 2 is the poorer version of the Fast and Furious movies. Without the charm and chemistry of its characters, the plot would just be too outlandish and frustrating to be fun. And therein lies the main problem with Pantera. It takes itself too seriously and doesn't know how to let loose and enjoy the ride more. Engaging characters and charisma go a long way to cover up the holes in the plot. Two of the characters disappear at one point in the film and don't reappear until the film nears its end. I'm sure it was meant to be considered some sort of twist within the story, but there's such a shallow build-up to it that I was surprised when they unnecessarily showed back up again. A couple more action set pieces would have also helped the pacing from growing too stagnant, as like its predecessor Den of Thieves 2 is far too long at nearly 2.5 hours. It's bloated and with nothing too exciting. Going on the wait for the heist itself starts to drag. Despite some tension, there's no real sense of urgency at any point. The film sets up yet another sequel, but Panta lacks the passion and consistency needed to dredge up any genuine excitement for yet another film in a struggling franchise. Extra information. Aside from numbering among its fans, the esteemed German art house stalwart Christians led 2018's Cops Androbus popball Den of Thieves made a name for itself by doing a far more convincing impression of Michael Mann's cinema than the many that have tried. Its daunting 2-hour 20 length, leavened by the most playful, unpredictable performance of Gerard Butler's career. It earned every one of those minutes on merit of its scrupulously detail-oriented approach to the heist, with a focus on the nitty-gritty of process that made Mann's masterpiece heat both credible and engrossing. The magic hour moments of pensiveness on a pristine Angelino beach may have laid the homage on a little thick, but first-time feature director Christian. Gudegast had the moves to back it up, his muscular filmmaking style serving the pleasures of its genre, the tension of a ticking clock, the insidery sophistication of burglary tech, the intense competency of the monomaniacally driven personalities drawn to the profession 7 years after the first installment spun an impressive payday from its ignominious January release date. Gudegast has returned to dispel the doldrums of a supposed releasing dead zone once again, and to prove that his now perfected the other key facet of Mann cosplay. Though renowned as the king of the crime saga, Mann orchestrated Heat like a macho melodrama, a tacit romance between two withdrawn men who must channel their flirtation connection and arguments into gunplay with an android. Touch elevating its imitative streak, the memorably titled Den of Thieves 2 Panta leans into the characterization of Butler's uncoudoying name-taking, aching Sheriff Big Nick as a figure of emotional waywardness. He's a real guy's guy, practically sweating testosterone, and yet his arc in his second outing follows. Plot beats more traditionally assigned to young women. Following a bad breakup, our protagonist spends a semester abroad. In Europe, where they broaden their horizons and regain a little zest for life while opening their eyes to the one true love that's been right there all along. He's not exactly eating, praying, and loving, but Big Nick learns to appreciate and pronounce a good croissant, and that's close enough reintroduced. Clenching his finalized divorce papers in his teeth while taking a leak at the courthouse urinal before whipping his wedding ring at the floor. Big Nick isn't in a great place. Maybe things didn't work out with his wife because he was hung up on the one who got away. In this case, that's Donnie Wilson, a Shaw Jackson. Junior, equally natural and affable and down to business modes, a real live movie star. The elite getaway driver who made off with the loot last time around, Big Nick's plan to track him down in Diamond. Hub Nice might provide some closure, though, as his FBI contact points out, the crooks have been operating far outside of American jurisdiction. As far as Los Angeles is concerned, they are not bothering anyone. And so the one-man crusade to infiltrate their operation and take it down from within comes to look more like the desperate measure of someone in search of purpose and community. As he integrates himself into the so-called Panther Mafia, he starts to loosen up a little, helped along by a night at the club wherein a hash and MDMA high leads to an apology to a former Yugoslavian for Operation Allied Force and a cathartic chant of NATO. The tentative coupling between Big Nick and Donnie, their bond strengthened over a mutual disclosure of backstory at one of the late-night shawarma spots, dishing up Italy's finest after Hours cuisine carries a runtime tacking 4 more minutes onto the justified bloat of its predecessor. That's how Guttigast can get away with long-windedness that threatens to turn this into a looser sort of hangout picture, as well as a script structure that's mostly preamble to the main event, the elaborate multi-phase job. Occupying the film's last hour, the technical diligence and conceptual novelty on display during the boost uphold a high standard of excellence. Its most inspired sequence played like a nerve-shredding game of red, light, green. Light, believably portraying expertise, requires some measure of the same behind the camera and the attentive inventive. Guttigast can keep pace with his subjects as a mid-budget meat-and-potatoes action studio release. There's something pleasingly anomalous and 90s retro about Big Nick and Donnie's last tango in the Côte d'Azur. But the film's chief virtue's elegant and spatially coherent camera choreography, Butler getting his groove on as Big Nick gets his back, the furtive intimacies shared by alpha males are timeless. Even if Big Nick was not constantly addressing Donnie as Fraulein for no reason in particular, the subtext that these two cherish each other would be apparent, all but explicitly laid out in a monologue from Donnie about the weird symbiosis between criminals and law enforcement. Never mind that the final scenes resemble the ending of Carol as much as the legendary diner reckoning from Heat. The chemistry between Butler and Jackson as two bulky bulldogs staving off loneliness by playing little games with one another announces the true content of the film loud and clear. The ensemble decamps to the Riviera to steal precious jewels only to discover that the most precious jewel of all is the bee. Homoerotically charged frenemies they made along the way. I wasn't the world's biggest fan of the original Den of Thieves. It felt like a lame retread of Heat, albeit without any of Michael Mann's style and substance. But hey, what do I know? Against all odds, the original film was a sizable hit. So here we are 6 years later with a sequel, Den of Thieves 2 Pantera. I wasn't expecting much, but I was pleasantly surprised by how much I enjoyed this slick sequel, which to me had a unique Euro-style vibe that felt fresh in the way its predecessor didn't. Set in Belgium, the film revolves around Asha Jackson Jr.'s Donnie building a European crew to rip off the Antwerp. World Diamond Center writer-director Christian Guttigasti, who returns from the original film, was inspired by a real life heist that occurred back in 2003, he does a nice job making this a more grounded heist film than usual with him. Avoiding the over-the-top elements one might expect in the wake of the Fast saga, to which this has a few similarities, most notably how Gerard Butler's character figures into the plot. In the first film, Butler's Nick O'Brien was such a comically over-the-top hyper-protagonist that the movie was hard to take seriously, with him coming off as almost cartoonish. Yet in the sequel, they show that his behavior had some real consequences, with it costing him his job and his family, with his wife filing for divorce and taking the kids. Thus, the movie has him throw in his lot, with Donnie and his gang opting to help them pull off their heist for a cut that will set him up for life. Now, Den of Thieves. 2. Pantera isn't perfect, with the biggest flaw in the movie being how quickly Jackson's Donnie buys knickknacks, story, and cuts him into the gang. He's supposed to be a genius-level mastermind, so it's hard to swallow him taking Nick at his word, considering how few scruples his former antagonist had in the first film. Yet it does give Butler and Jackson the chance to build some buddy movie chemistry, which, coupled with the Ural, helps make the sequel a lot more fun than the original. In recent years, Butler's excelled in making mid-level action films with his world-weary characters less glamorous and more believable than many other action heroes of note. In a Butler movie, he won't always have the upper hand on all the bad guys, and despite now being a crook, he's oddly more sympathetic than he was. In the first film, he's a guy who's dealing with the consequences of his choices, and Butler plays him with just the right amount of machismo and humor. By comparison, Jackson has less to work with, but seems to be having a ball in his buddy scenes with Butler, and is convincing as the brains behind the heists, with him soft-spoken and cerebral, compared to the ultra-testosterone-fueled Nick. While just like the original Den of Thieves 2 is too long running, over 140 minutes, the pacing is tighter thanks mostly to the fact that it's much more focused than the original film. In Den of Thieves, Gudagast, in trying to pay homage to man, spent too much time on too many uninteresting side characters to give them pals. He doesn't get caught in that trap here with Butler and/or Jackson, rarely off-screen. It all builds up to a climactic heist sequence that's punctuated by a nifty car chase or shootout that's very well executed, even if the movie ends on a note that most action connoisseurs probably already have figured out just based on the trailers. All said, I enjoyed Den of Thieves 2 Panta much more than I thought I would. With the sunny European lulls and international flavor, it's the perfect mid-level January release, and should prove popular enough among Butler's fans that I wouldn't be surprised if we eventually get a third movie in the series. It's surprisingly fun. This film, directed by Christian Gudagast, written Christian Guter, produced by Tucker Tooley, Gerard Butler, Alan Zagel, Mark Canton, starring Gerard Butler, Asha Jackson Jr., Evan Ahmed, Salvatore Esposito, Meadow Williams, Swen Tem, cinematography, Terry Stacy, edited by Robert Nord Music, by Kevin Matley, production companies, Tucker Tooley Entertainment, E1 Features, G-Base Diamond Film Productions, distributed by Lionsgate. Release date January 10th, 2025, running time 144 minutes, country United States, language English, budget $40 million, box office $57.4 million. So friends, this is the detailed review of the film Den of Thieves 2 Pantera, and some interesting facts about this film. Hope you like this video. Do give our video a like and subscribe to our channel to watch more such interesting videos. Thanks for watching.